The ELT signal was originally identified in the North Georgia Dahlonega area. We arrived at the Dahlonega airport after dark. It's important to note as we were driving up to Dahlonega, we were actually monitoring the ELT frequency within our vehicle and actually heard the ELT signal even on 400. The initial strategy with any ELT search is to determine airports, airfields in the area and quickly rule those out as sources of the signal. We arrived at the Dahlonega airport after dark and we quickly ruled out that the ELT was on the field. There was a second ground team responding. They were given the task of checking out another airfield in the area, which was the Camp Frank D. Merrill Ranger Camp. Once we determined that the ELT was not at the Dahlonega airport and the second team was responding to Camp Frank D. Merrill, we began moving north into higher terrain, tracking the signal.
All right, we've now stopped along Grassy Gap Road. This was the road that we were moving north from Wimpy's Field, headed in the general direction of the initial DF readings. All right, this is the location where we took bearing number 4 along Grassy Gap Road, and the fourth bearing gave us 350 degrees. And at this point, the bearings continued to give us a northerly direction, taking us further into the mountainous area. And it was somewhere right about now, maybe just before we got to this point, that we got the call back and that there was not an ELT going off at the ranger camp. Therefore, our two most likely airport locations had been ruled out, and we're proceeding north. And at this point, it's looking more and more likely that what we have is the real deal. All right, I'm going to give you a quick little map overview here. This is down at Wimpy's Field where we began our DFing. Then we proceeded up Grassy Gap Road, and we took our first 2 DF readings here. Continued to proceed north, and we are now located right here at number 4. And that bearing continues to point up north. But the takeaway here, folks, is that it's critical that as you're tracking a DF signal, that you actually use your maps and you actually plot. Because you can see this is notation from that evening. And you can see we plotted the number, the bearing, and actually put it on the map. So we could actually see a picture. And basically it's a detective story, but it's painting a picture, and it continues to send us north. So that's critical takeaway, that you plot your bearings, put the direction, and which sequence it was, 1, 2, 3, 4, X. All right, we're actually standing and facing the direction of DF bearing number 5. We're at the intersection of Grassy Gap Road and Cooper Gap Road. And the bearing was 150 degrees. And I'll scan around and show you. We're obviously pretty elevated now. It's hard to see in this, but we're actually overlooking Dahlonega. And at this point, this was the first bearing that we had received that actually started pointing to the south. So we made the decision at this point to proceed north to Gooch Gap and take another DF bearing and see if it continues to point south or if we're actually getting a reflection. But this was our first indicator that was pointing us south, indicating that we possibly have passed the ELT location. Okay, this is our 6th stop to take DF bearings once we got off of the hardball and left the airport. We're actually at Gooch Gap, and this right now we're facing in the general direction. We took 2 bearings from this location. We had one that was 145 degrees and another that was 165 degrees. Both of those obviously pointing down to the south again, confirming our last bearing, which was also pointing south. So this was as far north as we went, because all indicators were that we actually had gone north of the signal of the ELT, or location of the ELT. So we then proceeded back south. So we're actually going to go south past our point number 4 bearing and continue beyond there. All right, this is point number 7 where we took our DF reading, which is 0.2 of a mile due west southwest of point number 5, and this is Cooper Gap Road. And right now I'm looking up the hill, and this is basically the direction of our DF bearing at this point.
Wouldn't it be this way, Dad?
And we are, where my end of my finger is here, and you can see 220 degrees is bearing this way. So we have proceeded up from Gooch Gap. Things were still pointing to the south, and now we're proceeding past our point number 5 bearing, which is right here. Now if you notice, this is our first bearing that really starts to deviate more to the southwest. So we knew we had gone north of the target, and now we're starting to see a more radical shift in the signal, which starts to make things even more interesting. Now I want to note here that what I'm showing, these plots, are our best plots. Now we received other bearings, but determined based on using DF techniques that they were most likely reflections. So what you're seeing is the strongest, our best estimate of signal, though there were many signals because of the mountains and reflections, but we utilized techniques to try to pick out the most likely signal, and that's what we plotted. So we're right here, and what happened from this point on, we proceeded down to the bend in Cooper Gap Road, took another bearing which was not plotted, which pointed basically almost due north. Then on foot we continued the bend, and then on this side we had another signal that crossed back to the northeast. So basically in this bend in the road we had 3 intersections, very rapid turning of the signal, and it all pointed into this area, and basically that circle was the final location of the crash site.